I bet you never thought you'd see the day. Emily Roberts stood there, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk, staring at the email from her ex-husband, Michael. She could almost hear his voice as he begged for a job at her firm. The same man who had walked out on her for a younger woman, who now, ironically, needed her help to get back on his feet. The nerve, the audacity. She had built this firm from the ground up, earning every single inch of success while he had chosen the easy way out. But now he was desperate, and he thought she would just forget the past and hand him a job on a silver platter. She felt the rage bubbling beneath her calm exterior, but she kept her face composed. She had learned long ago that revenge was best served cold, and this was an opportunity to show him just how far she had come. As the CEO of one of the most successful law firms in the city, Emily had more power than she ever thought possible when she first started. The firm was now her empire, built on her intellect, her determination, and yes, her ability to turn the tables when necessary. Michael didn't know it, but he had just stepped into her world, a world where he no longer had the upper hand. She clicked on the email and reread his words, each one dripping with guilt and a desperate plea for a second chance. I know things ended badly, but I've changed. I need a job, Emily. Please. I'll do anything. Emily felt a tightness in her chest, not from sympathy, but from the sheer disbelief that this man, who had humiliated her in the past, was now begging for her help. He had walked out on her without a second thought, replacing her with someone younger, someone he thought was more exciting, more desirable. But here he was, powerless, knocking on her door. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered her response. She could give him a chance, let him prove himself, but that didn't sit right with her. No, she had a better idea. She hit reply. Michael, it's been a while. I see you've found yourself in need of a little help. Funny, isn't it? How life works out. You left me for someone younger, more vibrant, and now you're asking for a job at my firm? The same firm you thought I'd never build. I've worked hard to get to where I am, and I won't be handing out favors, especially not to someone who thinks they can waltz back into my life after abandoning me. However, I'll be happy to meet with you. Let's see what you can offer. She hit send. There it was, the beginning of her payback. Michael might think he was in control, that he could walk back into her life, and everything would be fine. But Emily knew better. This was just the first step in her plan to show him that she was the one who had the power now. She smiled to herself, knowing this was only the beginning. Michael's desperation was her advantage, and she was going to make sure he understood exactly how far he had fallen. He might have left her once, but now, he would have to beg for everything. And this time, Emily wasn't about to make it easy. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the email she had just sent. She could almost hear Michael's voice, pleading, desperate. The satisfaction of seeing him grovel was undeniable, but Emily knew she couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. This wasn't about getting back at him. It was about showing him just how far he had fallen. She didn't need to make him feel small. He was already doing that himself. He needed to understand that he had no place in her world anymore. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant, Claire. Michael is here for the meeting. Emily took a deep breath, adjusting her blazer as she stood up and walked out of her office. The lobby was quiet, the air thick with the faint hum of productivity. Michael was standing by the receptionist's desk, his eyes scanning the room, his posture stiff. The moment he saw her, his face twisted with a mix of guilt and hope. He stood up straighter, trying to appear more confident than he was. Emily, he said, his voice unsure. It's good to see you again. She studied him for a moment, taking in the man who had once been her husband, the man who had walked away from her without a second thought. His clothes were still sharp, but there was something about him that looked smaller. Maybe it was the weariness in his eyes, or the way his hands fidgeted nervously. It didn't matter. Michael, she replied, her tone cool, measured. Follow me. We'll talk in my office. She led him down the hall, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step a reminder that she had built all of this on her own. Her firm, her success. Michael had been a distraction, a weakness she'd allowed into her life for far too long. They reached her office, and she gestured for him to sit. He sat down, folding his hands in his lap, his gaze never meeting hers. Emily took her seat behind her desk, leaning back in her chair, hands clasped in front of her. You wanted a job, she said, her voice calm but firm. You say you've changed. Tell me, Michael, What makes you think I'd give you a second chance? He looked up, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret. I've learned from my mistakes, Emily. I've been through a lot. I lost everything. And I realize now what I had with you was worth more than anything I ever had before. Emily raised an eyebrow. And now you want to work for me? She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. Tell me why I shouldn't just dismiss you out of hand. Michael swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve this, but I'm willing to prove myself. I'll do whatever it takes. Emily's lips curled into a faint smile. You're right, Michael. You don't deserve this. But I'm going to give you an opportunity. His eyes widened with surprise. What? She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I'll give you a job, but not because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing this because you need to learn a lesson. You need to understand that you don't get to just walk back into people's lives after you've burned them. This is your chance to prove you're not the man I thought you were. You can start tomorrow, but don't mistake this for anything other than what it is. A chance to rebuild, a chance to earn back your dignity. But remember, Michael, I'm watching you. She turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. You have one shot. Don't waste it. Michael sat there, stunned into silence, his breath shallow as the weight of her words settled in. Emily watched him for a moment longer before turning back to her desk, signaling that the conversation was over. As Michael left her office, Emily couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. She had just given him a chance, not because she wanted to, but because he needed to understand that his actions had consequences. The power had shifted, and now, Michael had to prove that he could handle the responsibility that came with it. Emily sat at her desk, the weight of the decision settling over her. Michael had just left her office, his shoulders a little slumped, his step a little slower than it had been when he first walked in. She had given him a chance, but the reality was that this wasn't about mercy. It was about teaching him something he desperately needed to learn. It had been a long time since she had been in a relationship with someone who could make her feel so insignificant, so replaced. Michael's betrayal had been sharp, like a knife to her heart. But now, as she watched him leave her office, she realized something. She wasn't angry anymore. She was done being angry. She was done feeling like she had to prove her worth to him or anyone else. She had made it. She had built everything on her own. The firm, the reputation, the life she had carved out for herself. She had been through worse and had come out stronger each time. And now, she was standing in the place where Michael had once been, someone who needed her, someone who had to prove their worth to her. She smiled to herself, the feeling of power still new but undeniable. She knew this would be a turning point, not just for Michael, but for her too. The way she would handle this situation would set the tone for how she handled everything else moving forward. She didn't need Michael to validate her. She didn't need anyone to validate her. The next day, Michael showed up early for his first day. Emily was already at the office, as she always was. She had arrived before the sun even touched the horizon, as she had for the past 10 years. She had no intention of being soft with him. This was his chance, but it was also her chance to show him how serious she was. The stakes had shifted, and now Michael had to earn his place, not just at her firm, but in the world she had created. She watched as he walked into the office, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. He had always been the confident one, the one who knew how to play the game. But now, the roles were reversed. He was no longer in control. Michael, she greeted him with a nod, not bothering with pleasantries. You know the rules. You're here to work, not to beg. You'll be assigned to a case today. Make sure you're prepared. Michael nodded, his face red with a mix of embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite place. It was clear that he wasn't expecting this level of coldness, but it was necessary. She needed to see if he could handle the pressure. He had always relied on charm to get by, but now, he was going to have to rely on something more, something deeper. Emily didn't look back as she walked toward her office, but she could hear him following her. He was trying to regain his footing, trying to find a way to fit into this new world where he wasn't the one calling the shots. Emily knew it wouldn't be easy for him, and she didn't expect it to be. But that wasn't her problem. She had given him a chance, and now it was up to him to prove himself. As she entered her office, she closed the door behind her, letting the silence settle in. She had done what was right. She had given him a chance, but she wasn't going to make it easy. And in the end, that was what would make him a better man, or break him. She wasn't sure which it would be, but she wasn't about to back down. She had learned a long time ago that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Michael had made his choices. Now it was time for him to live with them. Michael's first week at the firm was nothing like he expected. The office was colder than he remembered, the hum of computers and the rustling of papers filling the air, but it wasn't the same buzz of excitement he had been used to. There were no power lunches, no endless phone calls, no feeling of control. Emily had made it clear from the start that this was not a charity case. The days felt long, and each minute spent working on the cases she assigned to him only reminded him of how much he had lost. The first few days had been an emotional roller coaster for him. He woke up early, the same way Emily did, and worked through the night. He wasn't used to this grind. He had always relied on charm, his connections, his reputation, but now it was different. There was no room for mistakes. There was no room for him to hide behind his past. Emily's voice echoed in his mind. You're here to work, not to beg. He didn't want to be the same man who had left her, who had thought he could start over, only to find himself in this position, needy, desperate, and unsure of his future. Michael sat in his cubicle, staring at the mountain of paperwork in front of him. His hand shook slightly as he picked up the next file. He had no idea what he was doing, but he was trying. The work was hard, but it was honest. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was the kind of work he should have been doing all along. As the days passed, Emily watched from her office, not saying much, but always observing. She could see the change in Michael. He wasn't the same man who had walked into her office with an arrogant smile and a chip on his shoulder. He was humbled now, though she wouldn't admit it to him. She saw his determination, the way he pushed through the long hours, the frustration in his eyes when he couldn't solve a problem, and the quiet way he tried to improve. She didn't know whether to feel satisfied or pity him. On the one hand, it was satisfying to see him struggle, to see him learn that the world didn't revolve around him, that nothing came easily. On the other hand, she knew this was the kind of wake-up call he needed. Emily had given him a chance, but that didn't mean she was about to coddle him. She walked past his desk one afternoon, just as he was finishing up a particularly difficult case. Michael looked up, meeting her gaze. For a split second, Emily saw something in his eyes, a mix of gratitude and frustration. She stopped in front of his desk and crossed her arms. You've been working hard, she said, her tone neutral. Michael nodded, not knowing how to respond. It's a start, she continued, but hard work alone isn't enough. You need to prove that you can be more than just a man who shows up on time. You need to show me that you can think for yourself, that you can contribute something more. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry. He didn't know what he expected from her, but it certainly wasn't this. I'm trying, Emily, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you are, Emily replied. But trying isn't enough. You have to show me that you can stand on your own 2 feet, without anyone's help. She turned and walked back to her office, leaving Michael to digest her words. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly at the bottom. But instead of feeling defeated, something inside him clicked. He had always prided himself on his ability to climb back to the top, to prove everyone wrong. Now, he had a new goal, to prove that he wasn't the same man who had walked away from Emily. He wasn't just trying to rebuild his career. He was trying to rebuild himself. Michael sat back in his chair, staring at the files in front of him. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready to face whatever came next. This was his chance to earn back everything he had lost. And this time, he wouldn't take it for granted. Michael had spent the past month trying to find his footing, each day blending into the next with endless paperwork, research, and long hours at the office. His confidence, which once felt so natural, had been replaced by a quiet determination. He was no longer the man who could waltz through life on charm alone. The work he was doing now was real. It required intellect, focus, and commitment, 3 things he had always underestimated. Emily watched him from a distance, noticing the subtle changes in his demeanor. He had started to ask questions, to engage more in meetings, to offer suggestions. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show her that he wasn't the same man who had walked into her office, arrogantly seeking redemption. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the office emptied, Emily walked past Michael's desk on her way out. She paused, seeing him still at his computer, his face tense as he read through a complicated legal brief. She stood there for a moment, contemplating. It was clear that he had come a long way in a short time, but Emily wasn't the type to give praise easily. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, making her presence known. Michael didn't notice at first, so engrossed in the work in front of him. "You're still here." Emily's voice was calm, but carrying. Michael looked up, startled. "Oh, Emily. I didn't expect you." He quickly stood up, adjusting his jacket, as if trying to appear more presentable. Emily didn't need him to be nervous. She had seen enough of that already. "I'm not here to reprimand you, Michael," she said, her tone neutral. "But I've been watching your progress. You've been putting in the work, and I'm starting to see some results. Keep it up, and maybe you'll prove me wrong." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Michael stood there for a moment, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to receiving compliments, especially not from Emily. He had always been the one who gave the orders, who demanded attention, but now, he was the one on the receiving end of a challenge. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "I won't let you down." Emily nodded and turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she stopped. "One more thing," she said, looking over her shoulder. "You'll never get anywhere by playing it safe. Don't just do what's asked of you. Show me something new, something you're capable of. I don't need a shadow of your former self here. I need someone who can think for themselves, who can take initiative." Michael absorbed her words, his mind racing with the implications. He had been trying to blend in, to work hard without causing any waves, but now he realized that wasn't enough. If he was going to succeed at this, if he was going to rebuild his career, he needed to do more than just follow orders. He had to take risks, step outside of his comfort zone. As Emily walked out, Michael sat back down at his desk, the weight of her words settling in. He knew he had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, he felt like he might just be ready to walk it. He looked at the brief in front of him once more, his eyes now seeing the problem in a new light. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he would prove to both Emily and himself that he was capable of more. He wasn't just a man who had fallen from grace. He was someone who could rise again, if only he had the courage to do so. Emily sat in her office, the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds, casting a soft glow over the papers in front of her. She had been watching Michael for weeks now, silently observing his progress, waiting for a sign that he had truly changed. He had been working hard, no doubt about that. His efforts were visible, but that wasn't enough. It never would be. Michael had always been a man who relied on his charm and connections, but Emily knew that wasn't going to cut it here. Not at her firm. She needed more than that. She needed someone who could think on their feet, someone who could take risks and lead when necessary. And Michael? He had a long way to go before he could prove he was that man. She had given him a chance, but it was up to him to seize it. The phone on her desk buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Claire, her assistant. "Mr. Anderson is here for the meeting," Claire said. Emily sighed and stood up, adjusting her blazer. It was time to see if Michael was really ready. When she entered the conference room, Michael was already seated, his hands resting on the table in front of him, his posture straight, his face a mix of nerves and determination. "Emily," he said, standing up quickly as she walked in. She nodded at him, not saying anything, and took her seat. There was no need for pleasantries. "You've been with us for a month now, Michael. I've seen your work. But now, it's time to see if you're ready for more." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the air between them. "You're going to take the lead on a new case. It's a high-profile one. We need someone who can handle pressure, who isn't afraid to step up when the time comes." Michael's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. He had been working hard, yes, but he hadn't anticipated being given such an important responsibility so soon. He was still adjusting, still finding his footing. I'm not sure I'm ready," he said, his voice tight. Emily didn't flinch. "You don't get to decide when you're ready. The job will never wait for you to feel comfortable. You either rise to the occasion, or you get left behind." Michael swallowed, his mind spinning. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. This was the opportunity he had been given, and he couldn't afford to mess it up. "I understand," he said, his voice more confident now. Emily nodded, impressed by his response. "Good. You start tomorrow. Make sure you're prepared." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. As Michael left the room, Emily sat back in her chair, watching him with a sense of satisfaction. He was starting to get it. He was starting to realize that the world didn't know him anything. If he wanted to succeed, he had to fight for it. Emily had given him the tools. Now it was up to him to prove that he could use them. Michael stepped out into the hallway, his heart still pounding. He had been given a chance, a real chance, and now it was time to show Emily, and himself, that he could handle it. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to prove that he wasn't the same man who had walked away from her. This was his moment, and he wasn't about to waste it. Michael arrived early the next morning, his nerves tingling with anticipation. He had been given the chance to prove himself, and he wasn't about to waste it. The case Emily had assigned to him was high profile, a legal battle that could potentially make or break careers. As he walked through the firm's sleek, modern hallways, he felt the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about doing the work. It was about showing Emily and everyone else that he had what it took to rise above the man he had once been. The day was a blur of meetings, calls, and endless pages of legal documents. Michael worked relentlessly, his mind focused on the case, the deadline, and the steps he needed to take to ensure success. He was determined not to fall behind. Emily watched him from her office, her gaze occasionally flicking toward his desk. She had seen how hard he was working, how committed he had become. It wasn't lost on her that Michael was starting to change. But that didn't mean she was ready to let her guard down. She had given him a chance, but she wasn't about to let him think he had earned her trust so easily. Trust, she knew, was earned over time, through consistent action and through results. By the end of the day, Michael was exhausted, but he had made significant progress on the case. He had dug through hours of paperwork, had consulted with colleagues, and had even come up with a strategy that could potentially sway the outcome in their favor. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the files in front of him. The room was quiet, and for a moment, he allowed himself to feel a sense of pride in his work. But that feeling was fleeting. He knew that he couldn't stop now. Emily's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that hard work alone wouldn't be enough. He had to prove he could lead, that he could think critically and act decisively. Michael picked up the phone and called one of his colleagues for a quick update on the strategy he had outlined. As he spoke, he noticed a shift in the tone of the conversation. There was respect in their voice now, a recognition that he wasn't just the guy who had shown up asking for a second chance. He was becoming someone worth listening to. That realization was the moment Michael knew he was on the right path. He wasn't just fighting for a job anymore. He was fighting for something much bigger, his place at the table. That night, after the office had emptied out, Emily walked past Michael's desk on her way out. She paused, her eyes briefly meeting his. He was still at work, his head bent over the case files, a look of intense concentration on his face. It was clear he had put in the effort. But Emily wasn't ready to give him any praise just yet. She had seen him struggle before, but she needed to see if he could keep pushing when the pressure was on. "You're still here," she said, her voice neutral. Michael looked up, slightly surprised. "Yes, I'm just finishing up some details," he replied, his voice steady but tired. Emily studied him for a moment. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination. Grit. She nodded once, acknowledging his effort. "Good. Keep it up. You might just surprise me." She turned and walked away, leaving Michael to sit in the silence of the office. He knew there was still much to prove, but in that moment, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He wasn't just doing this for Emily or for the firm. He was doing it for himself. And for the first time in a long while, he believed he might actually be capable of it. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Michael. He had been thrust into the heart of a complex legal case, one that tested his skills in ways he never thought possible. Every day brought new challenges, and every night he stayed late at the office, working through the details, rereading contracts, making calls, and brainstorming solutions. He no longer cared about the clock. The work consumed him. Emily had been right. This was his moment, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. He was beginning to see a shift in how people treated him at the firm. Colleagues who once ignored him now asked for his input. His insights were starting to make a difference. They weren't just tolerating him anymore. They were recognizing him as an asset. But Emily? She remained distant, her gaze cold and calculating. She was watching him, but never fully acknowledging the effort he was putting in. Michael wasn't deterred. He had a bigger goal now. He wasn't just trying to prove himself to her. He was proving to himself that he could stand on his own. The breakthrough came one afternoon when Michael found a critical loophole in the case he had been working on. It was buried in the fine print, the kind of detail most lawyers would have missed, but not Michael. His mind had been trained to see the small things, the hidden opportunities. He took his findings to Emily's office, the file in his hand heavy with the weight of his discovery. She was on a call when he entered, her voice sharp and focused. He waited, silently, standing by her desk until she finished. Emily glanced up when she saw him. Her expression was unreadable. "What is it?" she asked, cutting to the point. "I think I found something that could turn the case in our favor," Michael said, placing the file down in front of her. Emily raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she flipped through the pages. It didn't take long before her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This could change everything," she muttered, more to herself than to Michael. "How did you find this?" "It took time, but I just kept digging," he replied, his voice steady. "I knew there had to be something hidden." Emily sat back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, she looked up at him. "You're starting to get it," she said, her tone softer than it had been in weeks. Michael's heart raced, but he kept his composure. He had been waiting for her acknowledgement, but he wasn't going to let it affect him. He had learned to rely on himself. "I told you I wouldn't let you down," he said quietly. Emily leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. "This is your moment, Michael. Don't waste it." She stood up, walking around the desk to stand next to him. For the first time, there was no distance between them. "I won't," he said, meeting her gaze with determination. "I'll finish this. I'll make sure we win." Emily nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Then go. Make it happen." As Michael left her office, he felt the weight of her words settle inside him. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was about achieving something bigger, something that would cement his place in this world. He had worked hard, and now, he had the chance to make it count. He wasn't just Michael, the man who had walked out on everything. He was Michael, the man who had risen from the ashes, who had earned his place. And no one, not even Emily, could take that away from him. Michael arrived at the office the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The energy from his recent success had not worn off, and he was determined to keep the momentum going. Emily had seen his potential in the way he had tackled the legal loophole, and now he had to prove that he could finish what he started. He spent the entire morning in his office, poring over the case files again. The strategy he had crafted was solid, but now it was time to refine it, to anticipate every possible move the opposing counsel might make. As he worked, he couldn't help but replay the conversation with Emily in his mind. "This is your moment, Michael. Don't waste it." Those words stuck with him. She had finally given him the acknowledgement he had been craving, but he knew that praise was not a free pass. He still had to earn her trust. As the clock ticked, Michael's focus deepened. He wasn't just trying to win the case now. He was working towards something greater, earning his place back at the firm, and more importantly, earning respect, not just from Emily, but from himself. The day flew by, and by the time the office began to empty out, Michael was still at his desk, making final adjustments to his strategy. He could feel the weight of the case bearing down on him, but he knew he couldn't afford to crack under the pressure. He was done being the man who faltered when things got tough. That evening, Emily walked past his office on her way out. She paused, glancing in at him. Michael was still there, his face set in concentration as he worked through the final details. For a brief moment, Emily's expression softened. She had been watching him for weeks now, and she had seen the change in him. He was no longer the arrogant man who had walked into her office months ago, begging for a second chance. He was becoming someone she could rely on, someone who was capable of handling the pressure, the challenges, and the responsibility. She walked into his office without knocking, her presence felt as soon as she stepped through the door. Michael looked up, surprised but not startled. "You're still here," Emily said, her tone quiet but firm. "I told you. I'm not going to let this slip away," Michael replied, his voice steady. Emily nodded. "I can see that. You've come a long way, Michael. But this is where it counts. You can't afford to second-guess yourself now." Michael met her gaze, his eyes filled with determination. "I won't. I'm in this for the long haul." Emily stepped forward and placed the final file on his desk. "You've done the hard work. Now it's time to show everyone that you can finish what you started." Michael took the file from her, his fingers brushing against hers for a split second. There was no time to dwell on it. He knew what she was saying. This wasn't just about closing a case. It was about proving he could rise to the occasion when it mattered the most. As Emily left the office, Michael sat back in his chair, taking a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt in control. The fear and uncertainty that had once clouded his every decision were gone. He wasn't just going to finish this case. He was going to win it. And when he did, he would prove to Emily, and to himself, that he was worthy of the chance she had given him. Michael spent the next few days preparing for the final presentation of the case. He stayed up late, working through every angle, ensuring that there were no surprises left. The weight of the responsibility felt heavier now, knowing that this was the moment where everything he had worked for would either pay off or fall apart. Emily had made it clear that this was his test. She had given him the chance, but it was up to him to prove that he was capable of handling the pressure. Every detail mattered. He went through the legal arguments, carefully crafting each point to counter the opposition's claims. With each revision, his confidence grew. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was drowning in uncertainty. He was focused. As he walked into the courtroom on the day of the presentation, he felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. The room was filled with colleagues, some of whom had doubted him when he first arrived at the firm. They were watching him closely, waiting to see how he would perform. Emily sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on him. He could feel her gaze, but he didn't let it distract him. This was his moment, and he was going to own it. The opposing counsel stood at the other side of the room, confident, as if they already had the case in the bag. But Michael wasn't intimidated. He had spent hours preparing for this, and he was determined to give it everything he had. As he started his argument, the words flowed smoothly. He outlined the facts with precision, presenting the evidence in a way that left no room for doubt. He could see the other side starting to waver. They hadn't anticipated this level of preparation, this level of insight. Michael's strategy was working. The case began to shift in their favor. As he continued, he could feel the tension in the room. Every word mattered. Every move was critical. He didn't let his emotions get in the way. He focused solely on the task at hand. The hours dragged on, but Michael remained composed, methodical in his approach. He had a few questions for the opposing counsel, questions that cut to the heart of their argument. The opposition stumbled, their responses unconvincing. Emily's eyes never left him. She watched as he handled the pressure with the kind of calm determination she had been waiting to see. By the end of the day, Michael had done it. He had won the case. The room was buzzing with discussions, but Michael felt a deep sense of relief. He had done more than just prove himself to Emily. He had proven that he was capable of rising above his past, of facing challenges head-on and succeeding. As the team gathered around, congratulating him on the victory, Michael allowed himself a small smile. But even as they celebrated, he knew this was just the beginning. He had more to prove, not just to Emily, but to himself. Later that evening, Emily called him into her office. Michael stood in front of her desk, waiting for her feedback. "You did well today," she said, her voice calm. "You handled yourself under pressure, and you turned the case in our favor. But remember, this is just one step. There's more ahead. Keep pushing, keep improving." Michael nodded, the weight of her words settling in. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. Emily looked at him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "You've earned my respect, Michael. Don't waste it." As he left her office, Michael felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in a long time. He had finally earned his place, but he knew the journey wasn't over. This was just the start of a new chapter in his career, one where he would no longer be defined by his mistakes, but by his actions and the work he put in to move forward. The days following the win were filled with quiet reflection for Michael. He had done it. He had earned the respect of his colleagues, and more importantly, he had earned Emily's. But as the thrill of victory began to fade, he realized that the work was far from over. The case may have been won, but the real battle was just beginning. He had proven he could rise to the occasion, but now, he had to keep proving it. Emily's words lingered in his mind. Keep pushing, keep improving. As he walked into the office the following Monday, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. The office was buzzing with energy, the usual hum of phones ringing and the shuffle of papers filling the air. But Michael had a new focus. He wasn't just going to settle for the status quo. He wanted more. Emily had given him a glimpse of what was possible, but he wasn't content with just being a part of the team. He wanted to lead. He spent the next few weeks diving deeper into his work, taking on more challenging cases, and stepping up during meetings. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, times when the pressure felt overwhelming, but Michael pushed through. He knew he had come too far to let fear hold him back now. Emily kept a watchful eye on him, as always. She had seen the potential in him from the beginning, but she wasn't about to hand him everything. He had to show that he could sustain the effort, that he wasn't just a flash in the pan. And Michael was determined to prove her right. One afternoon, Emily called him into her office. His heart raced as he walked down the hallway, his mind running through everything he had been working on. When he entered, Emily was sitting behind her desk, reviewing a set of files. She didn't look up immediately, giving him a moment to collect himself. "Close the door," she said finally. Michael did as instructed, standing in front of her desk, waiting for her to speak. "I've been watching your progress, Michael," she began, her tone even. "You've shown consistency, focus, and the ability to handle pressure. But I need to know if you can handle something bigger. I'm giving you a new project. It's not just about the work this time. It's about leading a team. You'll need to manage others, make decisions, and take charge when things get tough." Michael's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the next step. This was the challenge he had been waiting for. "I'm ready," he said without hesitation, meeting her gaze. Emily studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I hope so," she said. "This won't be easy, but I believe you can handle it. You've earned this opportunity. Don't let me down." With that, she handed him the files, his first leadership role in the firm. Michael left her office feeling a surge of excitement. This was what he had worked for, and he was determined not to fail. As he sat at his desk, looking over the new project, he realized that the pressure was just a part of the journey. What mattered now was how he responded to it. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this office months ago, unsure of his place in the world. He had fought for this position, and now it was time to lead. He had come a long way, but Michael knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much more he had to prove, to Emily, to his colleagues, and most importantly, to himself. Michael dove headfirst into the new project, embracing his role as the leader of the team. It was different now. No longer just the guy who showed up at the office hoping for a second chance. He was the one calling the shots, making decisions that affected not only his future but the future of his team. The weight of it was heavy, but it felt right. Emily's expectations were clear, and he wasn't about to let her down. His first task was managing the team's approach to a complex client issue. The stakes were high, and it was his responsibility to steer the group in the right direction. He had learned to balance the pressure, but this time it was more than just himself. He had to consider the well-being and success of everyone involved. He called a team meeting that afternoon, gathering the members in the conference room. The faces looking back at him were a mixture of respect and curiosity. They hadn't seen him in this light before. Michael, the guy who once fumbled through cases, was now standing in front of them as their leader. "We're working on a tight deadline, and this is an important case for the firm," Michael began, his voice steady and confident. "I know you all have the skills to get this done, but we're going to need to collaborate more than ever. I need everyone's full commitment. Let's break down the steps we need to take." As he spoke, he could see the shift in the room. The team members began to engage, offering ideas, discussing strategies. Michael listened carefully, taking notes, and asking questions. He was learning how to manage, how to guide the group without dominating the conversation. It was a delicate balance, but he was starting to understand how to lead. Later that afternoon, Emily stopped by his office. She knocked lightly on the door before stepping in, her usual composed expression in place. "How's it going?" she asked, surveying the piles of paperwork on his desk. Michael stood up, trying to shake off the nerves that came with her presence. "It's going well. We're making progress. The team's starting to come together." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly not giving him the usual praise he might have hoped for. "Good," she said, her tone neutral. "But don't get comfortable. This project is just a small part of what's expected of you now. You're not just managing a case. You're building trust. You're shaping the future of this firm. Remember that." Michael nodded, fully aware of the responsibility she was placing on him. It was more than just getting the work done. It was about setting an example for the rest of the team. He had to show them that he could lead with integrity, vision, and determination. As Emily left his office, Michael sat back in his chair, the weight of her words settling deep inside him. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't afford to let the pressure get to him. He was no longer the man who lacked confidence, who had walked into Emily's office unsure of his place. He had found his confidence again, and now he had to prove that he could lead the team to success. The next few days flew by, with meetings, strategy sessions, and constant communication with the team. Slowly but surely, the project began to take shape. Michael saw the potential in his team, and he was beginning to trust them, knowing that they could carry the weight of the project just as well as he could. As the deadline approached, Michael stood before his team one last time before the final push. "We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. We're not done yet, but we've got this. Let's finish strong," he said, his voice filled with conviction. The team nodded, ready for the final stretch. Michael knew they were ready. But more importantly, he was ready. This wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about the future. His future. He had worked hard to get here, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. He had become the leader he had always wanted to be, and this time, he wasn't going to back down. As the days leading up to the final presentation of the project drew closer, Michael found himself at a crossroads. The work was done, the strategies were in place, and the team was ready. But as he sat at his desk, looking over the final documents, a familiar wave of uncertainty crept in. This time, though, it wasn't fear. It was a deep awareness of the responsibility that rested on his shoulders. This wasn't just a case. It was his future, his chance to prove once and for all that he could not only handle pressure, but thrive under it. The final presentation was tomorrow, and Emily had made it clear that this was a crucial turning point. "This is your time to shine, Michael," she had said the night before. "You've led the team well, but now you need to close the deal. Show us that you're ready for the next step." Michael knew this wasn't just about the work anymore. Emily was testing his ability to lead, to make the final call, to show the world, and himself, that he could handle the responsibility of running his own cases, managing clients, and making decisions. That affected the entire firm. The night before the presentation, he barely slept, running through his notes over and over again, rehearsing his arguments, and anticipating every question that might be thrown at him. He couldn't afford to let anything slip. As he walked into the conference room the next morning, his heart raced with anticipation. His team was already there, setting up the materials and preparing for the presentation. They looked to him for guidance, for reassurance, and in that moment, he realized how far he had come. The room was filled with the usual tense energy of a high-stakes meeting, but Michael felt a sense of calm settle over him. He had prepared for this, and now, it was time to show what he was capable of. Emily walked in shortly after, her presence commanding attention. She nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement that she was watching. Michael stood at the front of the room, ready to begin. His voice was steady as he started the presentation, outlining the key points and presenting the evidence with precision. He could feel Emily's eyes on him, but he didn't let it shake him. This was what he had worked for. The questions came, sharp and challenging, but Michael was ready. He answered each one with confidence, his mind sharp and clear. The team supported him, offering insights when needed, but this was his moment to take control. As the presentation drew to a close, Michael looked around the room. The atmosphere had shifted. His colleagues were nodding, some even exchanging glances of approval. He had done it. He had closed the deal. After the meeting, Emily approached him. There was no immediate praise, no congratulations. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said simply. "But remember, this is just the beginning. You've earned this, but you have to keep proving yourself." Michael nodded, feeling a surge of pride. This wasn't just about closing a case. It was about earning his place in the firm, proving that he could handle the responsibility and lead with conviction. He wasn't the man who had walked into this firm months ago, unsure of his future. He was someone who had earned the respect of his peers and the trust of Emily. As he walked out of the conference room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. This was just the start. There was so much more to do, but Michael was ready. He had fought for this, and now he would keep fighting. For his career, for his future, and for himself.